The Great Weaning Theory. In Ecology and Climate Change. The theory that has shaken everything we knew until now about climate change and the environmental crisis. The Law of Great Weaning. The author of the book Ecological Weaning, The Hidden Face of Climate Change said, "There is another truth about our existential environmental crisis that we are experiencing today and suffering from, which is still hidden from us until now, even though this crisis has been monitored since the 1950s of the last century. The first thing that this absent fact confirms is that the escalation and exacerbation of extreme climate change, which characterize the relationship of the entity of life with its incubator, planet Earth, have plunged us into a global existential environmental crisis, unable to face it properly and effectively. This was nothing more than the result of the end of one era and the beginning of another completely new one in this relationship. It has become urgent for human beings to clarify the essence of this transformation and to grasp it, in order to reposition and formulate their existential status according to what the reality of this new situation dictates in this relationship, and not according to what they have achieved and become as a result of the development of the effort of the entity of life itself to attain the eternity of its survival and continuity on planet Earth, which is inevitably on the brink of decline. This must be realized as a real possession of the new developments in the reality of this relationship and its transformation, as it is a direct implication in the making and creation of the history of this reality. This absent truth indicates that the existing transformation in the relationship of the entity of life with planet Earth has led to the factor of separation taking precedence and dominating, with the intention of becoming the very essence of this relationship, to impose the necessity of achieving the separation of life in its entirety from the Earth at the level of knowledge and the fulfillment of the act of duty. It is this transformation that allows for the realization of eternity for the entity of life on this planet, which is inevitably heading towards death and decline until the last moment of what remains capable of living. It is this transformation that makes the human being the real and conscious guarantor upon whom the entity of life depends to achieve its successful and safe separation from this dying Earth at the necessary and appropriate moment, like a greater weaning of two living beings, one born of the other. Thus, the establishment and realization of the entity of life with its incubator, the Earth, on the dialectic of the difference of the part within the unity of the whole, initially made this entity a leader embodied in all multiplicity, separations, and differences, in all manifestations of mutations, development, and renewal. Life, as a vital, intentional, powerful, and unlimited force, realizes eternity and the continuation of life in its absolute through this relationship with the incubating planet Earth, or independently of this relationship and this planet. This is embodied in all models, manifestations, and laws that realize the eternity of life in all living beings, not only in what constitutes a motive and a justification for their behavior, but to realize this intentionality, the most precise mechanisms of the universes of these living beings themselves function, such as cellular division, mitosis, in which the end becomes a new beginning and a new impetus to realize the continuity of life. But the pinnacle of what this powerful intention has accomplished in the relationship of life with the Earth is the emergence of Homo sapiens in its evolution, which has distinguished itself by the possibility of knowledge as a decisive synthesis of this entire relationship, to become the guarantor of the eternity of life in its entirety, and not only because it is the last of the living beings to have completed its evolution on planet Earth. For its existence would not have been based on its capacity for knowledge, unless it necessarily commits to doing what is necessary, the act of duty. The survival and continuity of human existence are conditioned by the fact that it is based on this possibility of knowledge, which allows it to position itself separately from itself, reflecting on itself. It can contemplate itself, contemplate the reality of the existence in which it lives, and what it must do or want to become, for it, by doing what is necessary, the act of duty, preserves its life and the continuity of its species, as it creates its history, its existence, and life in its absolute. This despite its knowledge of the finitude of itself and the inevitability of its death, which only serves to provoke it, challenge it, and push it forward to seek the infinite and the future. For the consciousness of death is one of the most important fundamental characteristics of the human race as a living species. As Theodosius Dobzhansky said, its awareness of the inevitability of its death has made its existence free in its essence, its actions being realized through the freedom of choice. The entity of life therefore relies on him to be the guarantor of the eternity of survival and the continuity of life, on Earth or beyond it. This is why human perception is only reached for something, as Edmund Husserl said, distinguishing it from that of other living beings. Furthermore, the entity of life has radically transformed with the emergence of the human being. From an abstract position, the eligibility of this entity for eternal survival and continuity, to a position of the possibility of actually achieving it. It is man who takes the reins and thus exercises his duty instinctively, consciously, and voluntarily, calling upon the faculty of knowledge. This act of duty, according to many well-known scientific experiments, such as those from Yale and Tokyo University, appears in babies at the age of 7 months. However, this situation, which constituted a radical transformation in the relationship of the entity of life with planet Earth, has led to what we are today in terms of a dangerous and global environmental and existential crisis, which has revealed that human beings have been at the forefront of this relationship since their emergence in order to achieve the eternity of life in its entirety. Since he possesses an innate and extraordinary disposition to transcend his circumstances and make his history, which is his capacity for knowledge, it is no longer possible for him to continue to lead automatically as he used to, due to the arrival of the entity of life that is distinguished by its eligibility for eternal survival and continuity in its relationship with its incubator, the Earth, whose collapse is inevitable. A critical and decisive step has become necessary for radical change, which requires the human being to change the position of his existential status in this relationship, not only because the deterioration accompanies the link of this status to the age of the Earth, which is destined to decline, but also because he must reclaim the reasons for his position in this relationship. He must fundamentally, with full awareness and will, be in the true intentionality of the relationship of life with planet Earth, so that the practice of his behavior and the construction of his history and civilization are in accordance with his true existential status, human, biological, evolutionary, that he occupies precisely in the system of the intentionality of this relationship. He is therefore experiencing a serious existential environmental crisis today. As soon as he managed to control all the resources of life on planet Earth, the serious flaw that had occurred in his relationship with his environment, planet Earth, became clearly apparent. His capacity for knowledge had reached a point where it became what legislated for him and allowed him, albeit compulsively, to destroy life and not achieve his eternity. Therefore, if the environmental crisis we are facing today, which is growing, dangerous, and global, indicates that the very behavior of human beings and their civilizational anthropological activity are actually involved in its production, which has imposed its current crisis in which extinction and the disappearance of life are threatened, and not the realization of its eternity, then it is also because it indicates that the emergence of human beings with a transcendent existence endows them with supernatural abilities that constantly evolve and surpass new and renewed horizons, due to their distinction in the possibility of knowledge. With all this, they cannot practically be involved in producing their existing crisis situation and, compulsively, realizing the danger it represents for their existence and the existence of every living being on Earth, except because they live under the pressure of the necessity to arrive at a new formulation of their relationship with their environment, the planet Earth. Their existing, spontaneous, and innate relationship with this environment is temporary and impermanent. They have now reached their maximum extent and are approaching their limit and end, which has put them in a true crisis. This means that this situation is at the heart of the development of the intentionality of the relationship between the entity of life and its incubator, the planet Earth, in order to achieve the eternity of this life and not something accessory to it, a question that began at the moment when the act of duty became central to this relationship. It has become imperative for human beings to find the true and correct formulation of the existential status that is appropriate to the transformation that the relationship of life with the planet Earth will entail in this intention, which requires continuous and direct perseverance to develop, crystallize, and enrich this existential status, human or evolutionary biological, as it must be the guarantor upon which life depends to achieve its eternity on Earth or beyond it. Ecological weaning, the hidden face of climate change. The blatant and extreme manifestation of climate change is nothing other than the reality of the evolution of the insistence of the entity of life on its eligibility and its right to survival and eternal continuity, despite the fact that the Earth, its incubator, is destined for death and decline. This is why the human being has only appeared in this relationship to play the role of guarantor of the eternity of the entity of life. For this reason, it has appeared with the possibility of knowledge, prepared in advance to accomplish this task it must fulfill, and to bear the entire responsibility of practicing it before it is too late. The situation that has been formed, as we mentioned earlier, by the dialectical intention of the relationship between the entity of life and its incubator, the Earth, aims to achieve the eternity of life in its absoluteness. This necessarily imposes the adoption of dialectical separation and its logic to reach the evolution of this dialectical relationship and its intentionality. This has required the existence of partiality, multiplicity, and the difference of this partiality, meaning it has necessitated the existence of the different living beings that make up the entity of life and have separated them from one another, including the human being. For the human being, communication or perception can only be realized because it is, by excellence, intentional in itself, as it relies on the logic of this dialectical separation, which does not impose the condition of a direct situation to realize the evolution of any communication or perception by separating the self of the perceiver from the perceived, except to realize the intentionality of the occurrence of this communication or perception. Therefore, the condition for achieving communication between living beings was not that the human being automatically pursues life in its entirety, but that it must reach this condition in its immediate involvement in obtaining, creating, and innovating this life. The human being had no possibility of knowledge, except that its perception is a direct practice to create the eternity of life in its entirety, not in its individual behavior, voluntary, conscious of being free in itself, nor in its anthropological or civilizational activity. This has given it the possibility of knowledge based on the separation and connection of things, beings, and phenomena, and their combination into a continuous, developing, and endless dialectical result. What has made the realization of the act of duty in the human being conditioned, or linked, to the acquisition of its possibility of knowledge is that it only occurs and becomes possible by separating two contradictions. Indeed, it concerns matter which, as much as it refers to commitment through the logic of dialectical separation, is imposed by the intentionality of the becoming of life to achieve its eternity in its relationship with its incubator, the Earth. In a unit of dialectical application that includes the common biological origin uniting the human being with the rest of living beings, the act of duty constitutes the logic of its particular species that has made it free and rational, distinguished by the possibility of knowledge, with the aim of arriving at an effective and successful way of bearing the responsibility of achieving the eternity of life in its entirety. This is why Nicolas Berdyaev said, "The actions of the human being do not necessarily include freedom, except because they are creative, and since this human being is creative, he can create what is good, useful, and beautiful, just as he can create what is ugly, bad, and destructive in equal measure." This perfectly applies to the reality of the state of the relationship between life and its incubator, the Earth, and is embodied in our current existential environmental crisis. The severe crisis that has emerged reveals that the relationship of life with planet Earth has reached a fateful existential stage and can no longer continue as it has until now. It has become necessary for the true existential biological evolutionary status of the human being to be fully present at the heart of the intentionality of this relationship, so that it can assume its full responsibility in a direct, clear, and explicit manner. The starting point of this matter can be determined, before the emergence of this human being, at the decisive and radical turning point that occurred when life shifted in the development of its relationship with the Earth, with the intention of achieving the eternity of its continuity. The spontaneity of what happens is what becomes, while the dynamic intentionality of the becoming of what must happen is what becomes. When the development of multicellular organisms forced them to intervene in determining their own destiny to ensure the continuity of their species and the continuity of life in general, and precisely when vertebrates appeared, some of them acquired the ability to use tools, and even to heal themselves from injuries and diseases. This is a unique phenomenon of natural weaning, a remarkable mechanism essential for the survival and continuity of the species, which works to achieve the biological diversity necessary for the survival and continuity of life in its entirety. B. The phenomenon of natural weaning in the entity of life was formed as a result of a radical, fateful, and decisive transformation that occurred in the development of this entity's relationship with its incubator, the Earth, from the moment vertebrates appeared. Thanks to this phenomenon, they acquired the most important and formidable mechanism for the survival and continuation of their species. The relationship between two vertebrates, one of which is born from the other following mating, cannot be separated in the name of the independence and autonomy of the newborn, except by adopting the phenomenon of natural weaning, which has become more evident among mammals. In addition to the mother's refusal to feed or nurse her young, and the change in her feeding habits and patterns, both parents pass on their experience and teach the young to manage their environment so that they can become independent and rely on themselves for their survival and the continuity of their species. With the emergence of this phenomenon, a transition occurred from the automatic transmission of experiences and genes to the offspring, necessary for the continuity of the species, as is the case with the biological social system in insects, to the realization of this transmission based on a more advanced system of individual differences that has become present in vertebrate organisms. This is why they necessarily developed the phenomenon of natural weaning, which allows them to transfer their experiences and genes, now richer and more complex, necessary for their young, with perfect and successful gentleness. Regardless of the variable clarity of this phenomenon in certain vertebrates, there is no doubt that it has played a decisive role in the intention to achieve the eternity of life in its absolute form. Not because it has become the guarantor of the eternity of the continuity of this life, nor because it guarantees the continuity of the species, but because it is the one who realizes and organizes the direct and explicit ecological relationship of these vertebrates with everything else in their environment, the planet Earth. The question that arises is that of the transformation of this natural weaning phenomenon into a practice, a true ecological weaning, with the emergence of the rational human being, Homo sapiens. Indeed, the phenomenon of natural weaning has occurred for him based on his capacity to know. He practices it with full awareness and will, and not just by instinct, as is the case with other vertebrates, for the continuity of the species. Natural weaning has become for him a conscious act, the ultimate optional act, dictated above all by duty, and practiced as a duty. This means that this phenomenon has become something completely new and different for the human being, as with its appearance, he soon transcended his primacy and innate nature, transforming it into a true ecological weaning, in every sense of the term, with all the characteristics of a vital ecological relationship. It is he who shapes and defines all his relationship with his environment and his otherness. While natural weaning is no longer a conscious and voluntary procedure aimed at modifying the dietary model of the newborn, but rather an immediate and real commitment aimed at outlining the characteristics of this newborn's relationship and programming it with its general environment. Whether it involves providing weaning accessories such as a seat to learn to sit, eat, or walk, or using distraction tools such as a pacifier, innovation is very important, as it blends into learning. The phenomenon of natural weaning, which the human being practices with full awareness and will, and not merely by instinct as is the case for the rest of the vertebrates, for the continuity of the species, has not transformed for him into ecological weaning, except because it is he himself who shapes the reality of natural weaning and the reality of its emergence in the relationship of life as a whole with its incubator, the Earth. It became evident when the existential status of the human being, characterized by the possibility of knowledge, became central to the intentionality of the process of this relationship and began to play a decisive role in it. Because ecological weaning is at the heart of the mechanism of his capacity to know, which frames, shapes, and crystallizes his practice in the making and creation of his existence, his history, and his civilization in the relationship between the entity of life and the planet Earth. Also because it is the matter that not only makes this ecological weaning a real possibility to cling to the incubating Earth, Gaia, which is inevitably destined for death and decline until the last moment as long as it is fit for life, but also because it allows a successful, safe, and timely separation from it, like a great weaning of two living beings, one of whom is born from the other. For the purpose of the emergence of the phenomenon of natural weaning, which refers to the logic of the intentionality of dialectical separation, through the dialectical process of the relationship of life with the Earth, is to provoke this ecological weaning, which, as it has come to constitute the framework and logic of their relationship, has come to characterize, frame, and program the direct responsibility of the human being in his leadership and possession of the intentionality to achieve eternity for life in the process of his relationship with its incubator, the Earth. This ecological weaning is the successful and effective innovation of life that has formed, refined, and developed in intentionality, the process of its dialectical relationship with the planet Earth, from the phenomenon of natural weaning, which no longer consists merely of modifying the nutritional model of the newborn for the continuation of its species, but rather to ensure its real and immediate involvement in the creation and realization of the eternity of life in its entirety. This ecological weaning has not programmed the communication of the newborn to realize all this with its otherness around it, except that its direct, deep, practical, and emotional communication with its mother no longer takes place in principle except with this ecological weaning that forms the identity of its being. It can only achieve its independence if it is intentionally aware of the creation and realization of the eternity of life in its absoluteness, for this intentionality has come to characterize, program, and frame it. This is confirmed and clearly established in the existence of the human being when this ecological weaning reappears and manifests itself at the level of a practiced version of what is called psychological weaning during adolescence. This ecological weaning is the complete and innate model that life has developed and refined to adopt in order to achieve its eternal continuity. It has become the absent truth that it is time to make present and known in our troubled reality, and which is nothing other than the hidden face of the serious existential environmental crisis we are currently experiencing. This ecological weaning is the perfect, complete, and innate ecological model of life par excellence, which can serve both as a tool for identification and definition, as well as a tool for evaluation and judgment. This can constitute a mechanism that allows the radical change necessary for the continuation of an essential relationship, as it is the model that enables the possibility of replacing the mother who wears her newborn and the newborn who is being weaned, whether for the purpose of identifying and realizing the separation between the logic of our common biological origin that unites us with the rest of living beings and the logic of fulfilling one's duty, or for the method of programming that duty itself. Ecological weaning is the phenomenon that must be recognized, understood, and treated as the pure creativity of life to restore the balance of an ecological reality that has become unbalanced. Our current reality, marked by crisis, demands that we acquire and adopt its logic as a method and slogan to frame and program our resistance and confrontation to the inevitable escalation of climate change, because this logic can be copied and reproduced, to renew and develop each relationship with every otherness, either by correcting the path by retracing it after dismantling it to start from scratch, or by radically changing this path through creativity and addition, as much as we can adopt. The logic of ecological weaning as a method for developing any roadmap or plan for sustainable development programs capable of adapting to the inevitable deterioration of life's relationship with its incubator, the Earth. It is also the logic on which artificial intelligence algorithms and their applications are based, as all the necessary specifications for the algorithmic application of artificial intelligence, genetic or otherwise, are consistent with the logic of ecological weaning, as it serves both as a tool for identification and definition, as well as a tool for change, reproduction, and innovation, as it is also a tool for evaluation and judgment. The book, Ecological Weaning: The Hidden Face of Climate Change. Available on Amazon Books in English since the beginning of 2025 in both ebook and print versions. Kindle KDP.